Welcome, folks. I know we have people joining us and we'll be signing on. And it's wonderful to have you here at one of the sessions during the Brandeis Alumni Reunion. And this one will focus on a particular chapter of Brandeis University, 50 years of Latinx, Latinos, Latinas from all parts of Latin America. We welcome you. We will also be addressing one of the great organizations that came out of the Latinx experience, GRITO. And we're hoping to use this session to both look at the past, the history, what came before in terms of the Latina experience at Brandeis University, but we also do so to look to the present and in particular to the future. And to those Latinx students who are at Brandeis now, who will hopefully be there in the years to come, to provide that historical context and to support Latinx students, both as students, as alums, as professionals. And in that regard, we have a panel of amazing, accomplished individuals who will represent the various decades of the past 50 years, who will share their experiences, who will always make themselves available to students and alums, whether as mentors, supporters, friends. We are all in this together, even though the years may have separated us. But it's wonderful to have you all with us at this session on the Latinx experience. And to begin that, and before I introduce the panelists, and we go through a set of questions that reveal the rich history of the Latinx experience, we have a very special video produced by one of our alums, Maria Rodriguez from the class of 75, and also her son, Dio, who really worked hard to give us this amazing video. But before we start that, let me give a special shout out to Elsi Ramos, the class of 1972. She is responsible for bringing us together, for giving us this space, for giving us this opportunity. Thank you, Elsi Ramos. We know you're there in the audience, and we're so appreciative that you are the madrina of this organization. So with that, I would now like to ask Courtney, who's from the Brandeis alumni group, who's been also very instrumental in helping us organize this session. We'd like to now first introduce the video, which gives a historical perspective from a visual approach. Wonderful. I think we would all say that the video in itself was worth the price of admission. Just amazing memories. Thank you. Thank you all who made this possible. And certainly we want to thank Maria and her son for this just amazing retrospective of our history. But for those students today who are students or will be students in the future, you will have your own history. You will have your own social justice movement, just as previous generations have had. I'm hoping, by the way, a suggestion to Courtney and Brandeis University, perhaps this video can be available for orientation for future incoming groups of Latinx students as a chance for them to put it all in perspective and to have that amazing context. So thank you again for all of you for being part of this, and to Maria and Dio, just an amazing way to start this session. I will now introduce the panelists who will build upon these wonderful memories and share their experiences. And I'll briefly introduce them. You've seen them on the video. I'm Fernando Torresilla. I was a Heller graduate student, but I was also a residence counselor at Ridgewood. So it gave me an opportunity to get to know the undergraduate students. One of them became my wife of 40 years, Elvira Castillo. So I'd like to say at Brandeis, I received my MSW, PhD, and my MRS. I married a wonderful student from that university. Well, and we're going to move to the decades. Into the 1970s, we have Naomi Vega from Brooklyn. She's introduced herself with graduate degrees in education, a longtime professor and teacher in Puerto Rico. We will move into the 80s with Norma Sanchez Figueroa, who's from Connecticut, also Puerto Rican, who's a judge in Connecticut, received her law degree in Boston University, and has been practicing law as a Connecticut Superior Court judge. And then we move into the 1990s with Blanca Elizabeth Vega, who majored in anthropology, Ecuadorian, who is now a professor at Montclair State University in New Jersey with her graduate degrees from Columbia University. And we move into the 21st century, the early part with Cesar Ramirez, who graduated in 2004 with a degree in psychology, lives in Florida, has his graduate degrees in organizational psychology, is a well-known consultant in the areas of personal coaching and human relations. And then to the current period, 2021, with Irma Reyes, who's majoring in international and global studies from Mexico, Chihuahua, raised in Kansas City, and currently working on her master's in education. So as we can all see, it's an accomplished group of Brandeis alums, and they are only the beginning of many more in the future who will make a big difference in this country and around the world with these types of professional successes. But now to hear from them, I'd like to pose to each of them in turn, beginning with the 1970s and Naomi. Essentially, what were your formative experiences and how has that influenced your personal and professional life? And how might that lead to advice for other Latinx students? And it gives me pleasure to introduce Naomi Vega from the 1970s, please.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this activity. First of all, I want to say that when I got to Brandeis, there was no Latinx organization. And we formed that, or I was one of the founding members in the 1970s, in the early 1970s. Basically, my experiences at Brandeis from very beginning, the first thing I got involved with was with the Puerto Rican group, which Elsi Morales and Orlando Isas, I think is his last name, who's here today. I'm happy to see him after many years. I had formed this group that worked with the Puerto Rican community in Waltham. So I immediately, that was the first thing I got involved with. I was a social activist before I came to Brandeis from high school. And so at Brandeis, that experience of working in the Puerto Rican community was a very, very satisfying experience helping that community. And we really expanded it. And a lot of the new students that came in also got involved. As you could see in the video, they got involved with the Puerto Rican group. The other thing is through GRITO, we were very active in trying to get more Latino students at Brandeis, Latinx students at Brandeis. And the video tells you a little of the history of the things that we were involved with. And also we were very involved in social activities outside of campus, like the anti-war movement. If in those videos, there's a lot of our Latinx students were involved in those demonstrations and on campus also with the lettuce boycott. So that community that we formed of the Latinx students that came in after, when I came in 1969, Elsi was the only Puerto Rican there. And then I came in and there was another Puerto Rican who came in with me. So there were three of us. There may have been some other Latin American students, but those come in through the WIN program, probably. Mostly they came in through the WIN program. But basically, students of underserved communities, there was just very few of us, three of us. The following year, many more came in. And again, through our efforts, we got more students coming in. And we formed a solid community of Latinx students. As you could see from that video, we were a family. And so that was just such a wonderful experience for me. And I can honestly say that some of the best experiences of my entire life were at Brandeis. That solid community that we had. And of course, for me, who came from I was basically homeless before I came to Brandeis. And now I had a home and I had a full scholarship and I had food and I had, books and I had an education. And it really was an exquisite education. My class sizes were very, very small because I majored in Latin American history. So classes were very small except for required general education courses, which were very large. So that experience at Brandeis was really one of the most important experiences in my life. And I've, professionally, I've flourished and had lots of opportunities because of my excellent education at Brandeis.
Thank you, Naomi. And we'll be coming back to each of you to expand on these formative experiences. And I'd like to now move to Norma from the class of 1984. Norma, you're on mute. Norma, you need.
Okay, I got it.
You are.
Thank you and good morning to all. Those who have joined us today. I'm just going to make one slight correction. I attended Boston College Law School, and I'm only correcting that because we were always rivals. So it's important that I acknowledge Boston College. Naomi, thank you. It seemed like the 70s in your class paved the path for us. My introduction to Brandeis was a bit unconventional. I started looking into college at a very young age, probably my sophomore year in high school. I learned that Brandeis had a TYP program. So what I did, I became a lawyer even before I went to law school. I petitioned my school, my high school, to allow me to graduate after 3 years in high school because I had fulfilled all my requirements. And mind you, I'm the first in the family to go to college, first in the family to go to law school. That was approved. I entered the TYP program, which was a great program for me. So TYP for me was my senior year of high school. Which, I learned so much. When I got to Brandeis, the first person I met when I arrived at Brandeis was a student named Rafael de Leon. And he was people probably know who he was. And he was in USDAN protesting, because at that time they were protesting the South Africa divestment movement. And I got really excited and I said, I think I belong in this place. And that's what motivated me. But while at Brandeis, while at the TYP program, I met great professors, English professors, who really helped me solidify my writing skills, which, that's what I'm doing now. As I used it as a lawyer, use it now writing decisions from the bench. But my experience was in what supported me when I was at Brandeis was GRITO. It was known as GRITO at the time. We did become as a family, we supported each other. We provided books to each other because we couldn't afford to buy our own books. So they would share the books that they used in classes before. And that was my family while I was there, my support system. I urge students today to find that niche, find that support system, because it's only going to help you get through the years at Brandeis. I'm going to agree with Naomi, my best years, or I'm going to say my best friends, were created at Brandeis. While at Brandeis, I also took the opportunity because I wanted to travel to Spain. I could not travel to Spain because my family didn't have the money to send me to Spain. So I learned that Brandeis had a program in Israel that was run by Brandeis, and that was the only place I can take my financial aid with me. So I went there for a semester. Actually, I spent 6 months there. While there, I was able to travel with some of my friends to Egypt. But it was, an experience of a lifetime that I would not have had otherwise. And I was the only non-Jewish person in this program. There were 12 of us, and I was the only non-Jewish. We would travel around everywhere. And because of my color, my hair, people thought that I was, an Arab. We would travel around Israel, and we would be lost and ask for direction, and all the answers were directed at me because they thought I was, an Arab or a native. And it was a great experience. And when I would people would ask me, where are you from? I said, I'm from the United States. No, where are you from? Puerto Rico. They most of the time didn't know where that was, but it was a great experience.
Thank you very much, Norma. And we'll be coming back to each of you as well. And let's hear from Blanca from the great class of 1998.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction and for that history. I'm sitting here really emotional because when I was a student from 1994 to 1998, and I'm a higher ed scholar, so I should say that I'm a higher ed scholar. I do race work in higher education, and I would say that Brandeis was transformative in the sense that while I have always been interested in areas of race and Latinidad since I was like 4 or 5 years old. I used Brandeis to really understand that a little bit more and how that affects, Latinidad and sort of racialization in the United States. So knowing the history now of what higher education institutions had been enduring in the 1990s, gives me a little bit of sort of peace and context, right? Higher education was embroiled in another, era of racial conflict on their campuses. In fact, some of the research that we have now is based from that era. The other thing that's less known is how Latinos were starting to take, the sort of being shaped by higher education institutions. And this was the time when higher education institutions were bringing in more international students. And some folks mentioned sort of financial aid. And, the international students don't receive federal financial aid from private institutions or from public institutions for that matter. So what I was experiencing in terms of what Latino or Latin American was at Brandeis University, who were student organizers, or I wouldn't necessarily say they were activists, but they were part of student organizations, were largely Latin American students who were able to afford Brandeis University. So that was my first introduction to what Latinos at Brandeis really meant, right? I was faced with a lot of classism and racism, right? So I was met with folks who, with Latin American folks who didn't feel like I spoke Spanish well enough. I was from New York, so I sounded different. I looked different from them. And many of my friends were also Black. They were African American. So, I started hearing more about why are you hanging out with them and not with us, kind of thing. So the Latino organization that existed at the time was called Ahora. And that I think was the descendant of Nosotros. So there's a gap there that we still, that we should try to recover about what the Latino organizations at Brandeis really was about. I was not particularly happy with the Ahora organization at the time because I felt like they were very celebratory in the sense that, there were parties and, and things that were celebrating Latino culture. But when I went into Brandeis University, I had seen so many problems, right? The fact that there were not a lot of Latinos from the United States necessarily, or immigrants, Latin American students, who were low income students, were not necessarily enrolled at Brandeis University, which led to me feeling undervalued, and, and the resources for students like me who came from low income, first generation, New York backgrounds, there were just not available resources. I was for about 2 or 3 years very resistant to what the Latino organization at Brandeis had to offer. Until, I was very much welcomed by the Black community at Brandeis University. I was very much, invited to the BSO, meetings. And I learned from my friends who were in the BSO, that there was a difference between celebratory and institutional advancement, right? That there was a need to have joy. So the parties that we saw in the videos, right? But what we also saw in that video was that there was a lot of work around institutional advancement. And that's what we were missing at Brandeis University. So I had about 1996, I had an idea. I wanted to do Hispanic Heritage Month. It was really pushed by universities at the time. And when I went to the Ahora organization, they did not want to do it. They said, we already have something, it's called Sancocho, it's 3 days. We really can't, we don't have more funding for that. This is when I knew Dr. Nathaniel Mays. He was Reverend Mays at the time. And he was like, we have to continue figuring out how do we, if you want to do Hispanic and Latino Heritage Month, you really should use, the Ahora, the resources from Ahora, the organization. And I was still like, but they don't want to do it. What do I do? You know what I mean? They don't want to do this. I like the party, but like, we really need a movement to let Brandeis know that there are too little of us here. There's not enough of us here who come from low income backgrounds, right? And Dr. Nathaniel Mays was like, nope, you got to go back. You got to figure it out. You got to figure it out. You got to learn how to build community with these folks. So I went a couple more times. They rejected the idea. And then finally in the last meeting, and this was not sanctioned by Dr. Nathaniel Mays, he did not say for me to do this, but I was like, he was like, I told him, I'm going to do this by myself. If none of you want to do this, I'm going to do it on my own. And I was like, so I don't need this organization. Yeah, I did. I needed the organization, but I had no idea what I was talking about. I was what, like 19? Like I had no idea, right? So I go in, and then I leave the meeting, and then I found that other students followed me out and they said, let's do this. Let's figure this out. And so that's when, Dr. Nathaniel Mays came in again and said, you have to run for president now. And I was like, what? I can't run for president for that group. I'm not going to do it. There's no way. I don't have any connection to that group. They all hate me. What does it look like me running for president? He was like, you got to do it. You got to run for president. If you want to do Hispanic Heritage Month, you got to do it. So here I am putting my name up for president, and lo and behold, I became president of Ahora, an organization that I had no idea, I did not like, I did not want to be a part of. I did not want anybody to think that I was part of this organization because I had no idea that there was GRITO and Nosotros before me, right? No idea, right? And this is what higher education does, right? It divorces us, and it's also what the United States does, right? It divorces us from our roots. Right. And we see it at the cultural level, we see it at the ethnic level, we see it at the race, the racial level, but at the institutional level, that was less explored, right? There were no institutional folks to let us know that that we had predecessors like Ahora and I mean, Nosotros and GRITO. And that's really what really shaped my understanding of Latinidad in the United States.
Thank you, Blanca. And I'd like to come back to those very issues. And let us now move to Cesar Ramirez, the class of 2004. Cesar?
Yes, thank you, Fernando. Yeah, for me, just great segue. I'm grateful to be part of this. I'm learning as we go along about the history, so no prior exposure to so many decades prior. But yeah, so I was there, as Fernando mentioned, from 2000 to 2004. And so the term Latinx really started developing around 2004. So it wasn't called Latinx at the time, but it was Hispanic and Latino organization that I was a part of. And Blanca, great segue. I was part of Ahora. I was active. I do remember, we used to meet about one time a week or so to connect, to socialize, discuss cultural events on campus, really help drive that awareness. So I guess it more from a lot of the parties, as you recall, as you were mentioning, to more of this like education and so forth. And Hispanic Heritage Month, I do remember, was very well celebrated, and we try to be as inclusive as, you know, of everyone on campus. And all the action happened at, I remember, at the Intercultural Center, so the ICC. But yeah, also just being part of those cultural events, right? Dance performances. We had events where we had diverse food from Latin America and Central America, the sancocho that was mentioned before, the empanadas, all of that, you know, just educating, sharing the experience, and just indulging in the delicious cuisines, right? So all of that was great. In terms of just big experiences that I recall, which helped shape me, and I'm just forever grateful for. 5 jump out to me. I'll keep it brief, but I was a Posse Scholar. So I was very fortunate to have received this merit-based leadership scholarship through the Posse Foundation to attend Brandeis. If I never got that, I would have never gone. I did not have the money. This was full tuition, but essentially 9 scholars and myself, so there were 10 scholars per year, got this. And prior to arriving to campus, we had leadership training. We connected prior and on campus to really drive you know, initiatives to provide support for others. You know, growing up in New York City, the Posse Foundation focused on inner cities. And so by default, it was diverse. And so we brought that diversity on campus. The second experience is just being a resident advisor. So similar to Fernando, I was a resident advisor for 3 years, and this helped create this social circle and made me feel connected. Also, I created an environment for my residents to feel connected, to share, to socialize. And then I just remember my family dropping me off, you know, prior to going to college, visiting me. Those moments, you know, my mother and father being there were just so important for me to psychologically kind of reinvigorate and just know that I belong there. And then I guess fourthly, the academics. Academics were tough. It was hard. I had never had so much exposure to like heavy just reading and exams. And so the fact that it was that intense, I did spend a lot of my life in the library just studying, but that coupled with like liberal arts really helped me find, you know, what I wanted to do. And I fell in love with psychology. That's what I studied there. They didn't have business at the time, so I minored in economics, which kind of leads me to the fifth point, really, which is the career. Without Brandeis, I would have never been, you know, where I am today. And so I coupled the psychology and the economics, did an internship the summer of my junior year at Bloomberg Financial in HR, human resources. And from there onward, that was it. HR was kind of my bread and butter, and got a full-time offer and so forth. But yeah, those were the foundational experiences. Again, just great experiences. Forever grateful of the Brandeis experience and Posse. And yeah, that's all for now.
Thank you, Cesar, and we'll be coming back to you, of course. And lastly, but certainly not last, because there'll be many more generations of Latinx students, but Irma from the class of 2021.
Hi everyone. So I guess like for me, I came to Brandeis in 2017. So not that long ago. Obviously, it probably seems like super recent to a lot of you all who have been done with school for a really long time. But when I got to Brandeis, so my whole life I attended public schools. They were like predominantly Black and Latinx. Everyone was from like the same neighborhoods as me, like low income neighborhoods. So I never really like knew how challenging or like the systemic reasons for a lot of the stuff that I experienced like when I was going through my public education system until like I was like in high school and stuff like that. But I am a first generation college student. I was like, I need to go to college in order to succeed, like in order to help my mom out, all this other stuff. And so I somehow ended up at Brandeis. And I remember like my first semester at Brandeis, I absolutely hated it. I did not like it at all. This was my first time being around like this many white people. It was very weird. I was very uncomfortable. I hated the food. Like the food was awful. Like my neighbors were annoying. Like everything about it, I just did not like it. Like the classes, I just felt super like left out. I felt afraid to like speak up in class because I felt like I was going to come off as uneducated. I felt like I looked weird because all of my clothes are like thrifted and like, you know, pretty low quality, and like everyone else like looked super nice and had all these like expensive things. So pretty much everything about my experience at Brandeis when I first was there was like not fun. Like I did not like anything about it. So I ended up like staying a lot in my room and like not doing anything, which kind of made things worse and made me hate it more because I was like not having fun there at all. But then I attended, like, it was actually Incendio is what we call it. It's like the Hispanic or Latinx Heritage Month celebration. I attended that because my roommate, she's my white roommate, but she told me, she was like, hey, Irma, like, did you see like this event is happening? It's like for Latinx students, like you should definitely go. And she was willing to go with me, even though she wasn't part of the community. And so we ended up going. And I really enjoyed it. It was kind of raggedy. I'm not gonna lie. Like it wasn't the best like event I've ever been to, but I was like, wow, like it's so cool to see like that there is a Latinx community here on campus, and I like want to be involved more. So then I didn't end up getting involved that semester because I was super busy. It was like I was still getting used to Brandeis. So then my next semester I joined the dance group, which is called Latin Extreme. So I joined that because I was like, this is fun. This is a way for me to meet people. Like I love dancing. Whatever, like seems like less of a commitment. And I don't think at the time I was aware that like the BLSO, like the Brandeis Latinx Student Organization, was like doing any elections or like looking for any new like executive board members. So I didn't think to like ask or anything. And through there, I like made friends with some other Latinx students, especially a lot that were already on BLSO's e-board. And so I started getting more and more involved. And I would say that like throughout my time there, I ended up becoming president like my second semester of sophomore year, which was kind of scary because I didn't really know what I was doing. I had only been on the e-board for about a month, and I was like an event coordinator, and we were doing like, I was helping out with events. But at the time I felt like BLSO was very like unstable. It wasn't very well organized. The events that we were putting on were kind of unsuccessful. Like I didn't see that there was like huge attendance except for Incendio. That was like the only event that a lot of people were attending. And other than that, people were not coming out to our general meetings really. So I kind of wanted to take charge and like make some changes and like make BLSO a well-established organization on campus, because it felt like no one knew that we were there, because I didn't know that they were really there, that they were doing any of these events that we were actually organizing until I was actually on e-board. So I ended up getting a lot of younger people, or like, yeah, like first years, even though I was a second year, but a lot of younger people to join our e-board. And started making a lot of like administrative changes to the organization. So like the amount of members who were there, what kind of events we were holding, things like that, and just trying to make it a lot more well put together. And so kind of like Blanca was mentioning, there was like a big challenge because I feel that a lot of the Latinx like experience is so different to people. Like we have also like international Latin American students, and they don't interact with like US based Latinos at all. Like they're a whole distinct world. Like Blanca was saying, like they kind of live in their own kind of world, in their own bubble, that like don't interact with us. They see us as different, or like they don't understand like the US like systems that we've operated under and why we like act in this way or why we are this way. So there's like a huge distinction there. And even among US based Latinos, like there's a huge difference because some people are coming from different socioeconomic classes. Some people are white and live a white experience on campus as Latinos, and some people take advantage of their light skin and incorporate themselves into those white groups and continue to exist as white students in those spaces. And then we also have Afro-Latinos who do not feel comfortable in the BLSO space because they don't feel identified in that space. And then we have like brown Latinos who sometimes don't feel comfortable coming out to these events, or they kind of navigate both of those worlds and, you know, don't necessarily feel like they need to be in this space. And so it kind of felt like we were never really sure what Latinx students wanted. So for me, I knew that something that I really wanted from the organization was to see a lot more responsiveness to like the political state of Latinx people in the United States. And so like, I took a lot of initiative to start making more events that were talking about these relevant issues. Like we've held like immigration teach-ins, we've held like career panels, we've held like, we had like an Indigenous erasure workshop last semester. We've had like Afro-Latinx, like people like speakers come and talk to us about their experiences. So I've definitely tried to kind of change like the way that BLSO is like what our focus is, but at the same time, I felt like a lot of students didn't want to come to those events because those were our least popular, but people really loved coming out to Incendio and our like parties and stuff, which is really frustrating because I feel like as an organization that was founded on like political movements and activism, seeing what students want now because they are privileged in their identities and don't feel the need to be a part of the community is really frustrating for like the few of us who do want to seek that community, because it's only us at those events. It's always only like our e-board members and like a few of our friends. So I don't know, I would say for my experience with like the Latinx community on campus, a lot of my experiences were around trying to implement change through BLSO. Never really feeling supported by, you know, a lot of the community members, which sucks because this is who I was trying to like connect with, and it felt like there was no connection. And then like administratively, like a lot of white, like in a lot of the white spaces, like they don't even know that cultural clubs exist on campus. And so there was just like no allyship, like no support. And so for me, it was really frustrating. The whole experience was really frustrating. I feel like I've done a lot through what I did with BLSO, and I'm really happy about it. But at the same time, the whole experience was really frustrating. And I feel like right now there's like room for growth and there's room for like space to improve BLSO as a whole. But I also think that there should be a lot more space for, I just don't know. I don't know exactly what students want, and I don't know like how we can achieve that, like integrate, like, you know, like the connection. I think there's just like a missing link between what we're trying to do as an organization and like what the community as a whole, like what their experiences are. So it's kind of hard to navigate that, but I don't know. I think we have some strong executive board members. Some of them are actually here. So I'm excited to see what they do with the organization in the upcoming years. I know that they have my full support, and I'm still in connection with them. And so I kind of just hope that, you know, there's more community members that want to be involved and that, you know, feel that sense of community in the events that we're holding and stuff.
Thank you, Irma. Thank you for bringing us up to the present, but also for your efforts to continue that legacy that began back with Naomi's era. So we're going to, in the last 30 minutes, attempt to do two things. One, I'm going to present a series of questions to the panelists that can share their dialogue, but we also want to allow time for those who are on the Zoom, our attendees, participants, to also ask questions, which they can do via the chat. But let me just begin, and of course we'll want to keep our answers rather concise so that we can make good use of the remaining 30 minutes. But Naomi and Cesar, given what we heard, so Naomi and Cesar, given what you've heard, how would you suggest that students face the challenges of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Brandeis?
No entiendo, no puedo oír lo que está.
And it's always good to hear Jose in the background. Naomi and Cesar?
Okay. Well, basically, did you ask how did we face the challenges of diversity? Is that what you asked?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
Well, I just want to say that when I went to Brandeis, I felt very comfortable with the Afro-American community. You know, so I didn't mention that before, and I think I want to mention that because, you know, my background, you know, in high school and in my community, I was very involved with the Afro-American community. So I didn't feel any challenge because I was so, I felt comfortable, even though there weren't a lot of Latinx students there. But I felt very comfortable, you know, being in the Afro-American community and, you know, Afro-American studies. I took courses in that. and then being very involved with the Puerto Rican group. Now, I don't know, it seems like the Puerto Rican group doesn't exist anymore because, you know, Waltham, there's a Waltham group, and Puerto Rican group came out of the Waltham group. And the Waltham group was an organization that did, you know, social action in the community, did work in the community. So I don't know if that exists anymore. But basically, that's, you know, I just want to say also, I didn't feel any kind of, with the white community, I never even had a white friend the whole time I was there. Nor did I have any need for it or want it. You know, I just, you know, didn't, but I didn't feel any discrimination at all from anybody, you know. But I'm a very outspoken person. So, you know, I wasn't intimidated by anything anybody could ever say. But I felt, even though my first year my roommate was white, and she and I had a lot of fights because she was extreme right and I was extreme left. So there was a lot of friction there, but that didn't bother me either. I just, you know, went along and did my own thing, and I didn't worry about it. So the challenge is really to feel self-assured that you can survive if you're outspoken, if you have a self, you know, you have a lot of high self-esteem of yourself, which I did. I don't know how, but I did. So that was, you know, how I felt. And I didn't have any problems with any challenges in dealing with inclusion at Brandeis.
Good. And Cesar, your views on that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, for me, I think being a minority at Brandeis, again, from 2000 to 2004, I think by default, you felt like you were limited in numbers. I felt that very clearly. And sometimes I didn't feel like I belonged there. I mean, fortunately, because of Posse, again, inner city high school students, there was some level of diversity. That was like my go-to people. Beverly, I see her in the audience. She was also there. So by default, there were some connections made. Also, well, a couple of things. Brandeis is well historically a Jewish institution. I think when I was there, 65% or so of the population was Jewish. And so there wasn't as much diversity. And again, coming from New York, this was a bit of a culture shock. I think my personality definitely helped, though, to break through these barriers, if you will, you know, to thrive, to excel, to network. Again, Posse, being a resident advisor, that helped me really just overcome these feelings of not seeing as much diversity or feeling like I belonged at 100%. I think if I was more of an introvert, I would have struggled so much more, because I would have felt just it would have been harder to just build these relationships. And then in terms of equity, just in general, I guess how Brandeis operated, I did feel like it was a good playing field. I felt like I had the right resources, you know, to turn to, whether it was career services, student support services, tutoring, you know, professors. I felt like there was that feeling of equity to a certain extent. And yeah, that would be my answer for that, Fernando.
Well, you know, building on that, for Blanca and Norma, you know, the fact is that Latinx students and our Black brothers and sisters were all in the minority, quote unquote. So our question is, how did you, Blanca and Norma, how did you interact with the non-Latinx, the non-African American community at Brandeis, since they were obviously the majority, and how might that, you know, give some positive lessons or some advice for other students who might be, quote unquote, in a minority? Norma, your thoughts on that? I mean, Blanca, excuse me. We'll go first with Blanca. How would you interact with the non-Latinx community at Brandeis?
Oh, you know, I will say that I, you know, grew up not just working class, poor New York, but I also grew up Catholic, right? And so before I left to Brandeis, my mom gave me an escapulario, so like a little, you know, a cross that I would wear around my neck. And so I went to, that was like a protective thing. My mom, sent it to me, Dios me lo bendiga, me lo acompañe siempre, all that stuff. And they were terrified when they first came to Brandeis to drop me off. They were absolutely terrified. They were like, one, I can't speak to anyone in Spanish here. And two, who's gonna feed my kid, right? Within the first week, we were, students were invited to different, barbecues and North Quad and all that stuff. And I had no idea what kosher was, but there was a kosher line and there was a non-kosher line. And, my friend Beth was like, you go get the hot dogs, Tiff, you go get, so my other friend was like, you go get the hamburgers. And we all come together and, because this was a group of women of color and working class, some white women that we met within that first week. We lived on the same floor and we all became, fast friends. And so when I was collecting, the hot dogs for my group, whoever was at the front, I was told later it was a resident assistant who happened to be a white male and Jewish, right? He pretended like he was giving me hot dogs and then gave it to the next person sitting, standing next to me. And he kept doing that. And after a while, you're a New Yorker, you're like, yeah, dude, I'm going the other way. I don't know what you're trying to do right now, but I'm, I should go, right? And as I walk away, he said, what is this, Jews for Jesus? That was my first introduction to, the non-student of color community at Brandeis University. One of my first introductions. That kind of, unfortunately, that kind of experience was something that, again, makes me very emotional because I wasn't the only one who experienced that kind of, those kinds of incidents, right? Where, these were obviously, racist, these were obviously, anti, everything that I could have imagined, right? So, there was no way for me to really bridge, I would say with the community at Brandeis. But I also know now as a higher education scholar that, again, racial tensions were really high in the 90s, right? And there was a need for different communities to hold tight onto what they had because they felt like they had a loss of, and this is research, I'm not saying anything, that's new here, but white communities felt very threatened by, a growing group of people of color in higher education spaces, right? We're experiencing that today with the backlash of CRT. So we saw that critical race theory. So we saw that in the 90s a lot, right? There was kind of like a tightening of the reins of resources, right? Because they felt that they were probably not receiving them in the name of, admitting diverse students of color. I did not know that at the time, right? So one of the things that we need to do to prepare students is to prepare them with the language, to defend themselves against these racial microaggressions and racial macroaggressions, these racist, messaging that that students are often given and that they're not prepared to face when they go to college. So that's what I would say is one way to be able to to address these issues is to have higher education administrators and folks on campuses to be able to provide the language to students of color to be able to face, have that arsenal of weapons to be able to, to face, racist aggressions on campus.
Thank you. Important advice. Thank you. And Norma, your thoughts on this subject? Norma, you're on mute. Norma, you are on mute.
Okay.
There you go.
There we go. Again, I'm going to agree with Blanca in terms of needing those resources and the language and, to be able to handle this kind of, treatment and feeling. I mean, for me at Brandeis, I didn't have such an overt experience such as yours, Jews for Jesus. But it was definitely an underlying something that wasn't spoken, but you always felt like you didn't belong. And I didn't know whether it was because I was a woman of color, a student of color, or because I was not Jewish, but it was definitely there. I mean, you're on a floor with probably predominantly whites and Jews, and you share a bathroom clearly, and people don't speak to you. So it was a very difficult experience. And for me, the saving grace was my involvement with BISO, my involvement with GRITO that later became Nosotros. And I think it became Nosotros when I was still there, and I don't know why, but it became Nosotros. So it's definitely a feeling of you do not belong. What I advise, because I always did, took it upon myself to engage and to be involved and to be noticed. In other words, I don't care what you think about me. I do belong here. I didn't get here because, yes, I come from a lower income, but I didn't get here because they allowed me to come in, even though I do not qualify, because that sometimes was the perception too. Why are you here? Why didn't you go to a community college? That, again, wasn't an overt thing, but you always felt like you didn't belong. Irma brought up a very important thing. Yes, in the classroom, I was afraid of raising my hand. I always felt that everyone was looking at you, and you were afraid that you weren't going to sound intelligent enough, or that you were grasping the material that was being presented to you. So that feeling was always there, and I believe that part of that is because you always looked around and you were the only one in the classroom. So, the importance of having more diversity, both in cultural diversity and color is important. Because, we had students also, there were many, many students who came in directly from Puerto Rico when I was there. They did not associate with the GRITO, either because they were fairer skinned, or came from better economic backgrounds than most of the US Latino students, but there was always a division. I knew who was from Puerto Rico because you look at the book that you get the first year with your picture on it, and you had all these people who came from Rio Piedras, Puerto Rico, Guaynabo. We used to get that all the time, but they would never let themselves known, walk by you on campus and did not acknowledge you. So, socioeconomic color differences was definitely there when I was there. But I knew that I had a mission. I wanted to go to law school and I had to become involved, and whether or not people would not like what I was going to say, I raised my hand and said it. But not everyone has that courage. And I think the administration really needs to, based on what I'm hearing, I graduated in 1984, based on what I'm hearing, those things still exist. And it's concerning, my daughter is a freshman in college, and, she got into Brandeis. I did not influence her decision, but I was very concerned about what her experience was going to be. Thankfully, she said she didn't want to be in Boston. She wanted to be in New York. So, but that was one of my biggest concerns, because I know, although I made the best of my experience at Brandeis, to the point that, I got into great law schools. And I have all of that. I'm very grateful for the educational experience I had at Brandeis, because as Cesar said, I was bombarded, reading all these books, preparing, writing, 20-page papers, all of that I did not get in high school. I got at Brandeis, and it made me who I am today academically. And, when I walk into a room and people ask, where did you go to school? Brandeis University, the eyes that are open because of that, the reaction, oh, you went to Brandeis? My niece applied there and didn't get there, and they're Jewish. So, that reaction, when I was interviewed to become a judge, the same thing. Brandeis University, wow. So, I do have a lot to be grateful for because Brandeis adequately prepared me for my career. But, I was extremely concerned when my daughter said, "Oh, mommy, I got into Brandeis." Da, 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 da. I didn't think she was going to have a problem getting in, but I was concerned. And when she says, "I don't want to go there, I'm going here," but that became a very, big thing for me as a Brandeis graduate based on my experience.
Thank you, Norma. That was important feedback. And I want to begin to kind of wrap up. And Irma, I think when we all want to both address the many issues that have been raised here in this panel, certainly to revel on the fact that we had a great academic education, but Irma, how can we as alumni, be a resource to Latinx both today and to those considering Brandeis and to those like Norma's daughter that might be accepted to Brandeis and maybe to have them feel more comfortable about considering going there? Irma, your thoughts? How can we as alums be supportive?
Yeah, so I think some of the thoughts that y'all are already sharing in the chat are a great idea. I think that, like Blanca was mentioning, I think there's a lack of support for the work that we do. I think I was talking to some of the current e-board members, and we were talking about how challenging it is to like push for change when there's no student support behind that. It's constantly the same group of people doing the same work on top of the super rigorous academics and extracurriculars and part-time jobs and everything else that we have to work on. It's very challenging, especially when there's no support from the community itself to implement those changes. And there's also no support from anyone else, so it's literally just us doing all of that work, which I think makes it really draining and really difficult to like continue and push for more and to do things right, because I think sometimes things kind of fall through the cracks when you're already tired and you're the only one doing the work, So I do think that a lot more support from the alumni in whatever way that you all can contribute, I think would be amazing. Something that we talked about was potentially some type of network that would actually put us in communication. A lot of us, I know before I had tried to organize an alumni panel in previous years, and I had reached out to alumni relations, and they never got back to me, even though I emailed them multiple times. And this was something that I think I shared with Elsi when we first started talking and telling them, like, we have been trying to do this and no one has been willing to support us. There's no way for us to connect with you all. Like, we have no idea, like, before this, like, we had no idea who was an alumni. There's no records of you all, like, anywhere that we can access. Like, they wouldn't share that information with us. I think I got in touch with Blanca because she was a keynote speaker at around the world, the diversity for new incoming students or something. And that's how me and Viv got in touch with Blanca. And it's really only through events that they're willing to put on that we're able to connect with you all. And so I think a more direct network would be amazing to ensure that you all are connecting with us as current students. I think a lot of us also struggle with transitioning out of college and finding careers, and having the support of alumni who are already in those careers and well established and can provide networking opportunities for us within those fields, and job opportunities, internship opportunities would be amazing, because we have to do all that work ourselves, which is fine. We all had to do the work ourselves, but having those connections would be amazing, because we really don't have very many Latinx professors on campus who are willing to do that for us. I think I think this could happen either through a LinkedIn group or a Facebook group where people like alumni are posting opportunities and students are posting questions, advice, requests, things like that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh yeah, I think also just staying in touch with us about events that we're hosting and supporting those events. We put on a lot of amazing events throughout the semester, and we have a pretty big Latinx Heritage Month celebration. And I'm always, when I was organizing those events, I would always reach out to professors and staff and trying to reach out to alumni and inviting you all to attend. And there was almost never any responses or any people actually attending those other than students. And so seeing that actual support at our events, having those connections with you all, like we would love to have more keynote speakers, more alumni panels, more like career networking opportunities, things like that would be amazing. And also just in regards to the type of support that we would use, like in our activism work on campus, I think there are a lot of institutional changes that need to be put into place. I think a lot of you all have already like been through these experiences of sitting in at Brandeis and seeing that there's no support from like the administrative side, that like there's just a lot of bureaucracy that happens that like makes things impossible to like actually follow through. In the chat, I was talking about how a lot of our request for funding gets rejected due to pretty racist and like not culturally aware funding policies that happen through like the student union. And even though there has been a lot of pushback from cultural clubs on campus, like little has been done to change. And there's also a lot of like discrimination and colorism within those policies as well. Like we as a like mixed light-skinned, brown-skinned organization end up getting a lot more funding than our Black student organization does, than our Caribbean Culture Club does. And we've tried to use that to like help them out and try to get them more funding and letting them know like you guys can request more because they are giving us some, and if they're giving us money they can give you money. And so there's just a lot of like moving parts that I think you all can support us in, and I think just being in communication with us and would really help, because that way you all know what we're working on and in what ways you can support, because it's hard to say do this one thing because that might change next semester, that might look different in 6 months than it does right now. And I think just staying in touch is really important, and making sure we're building those like connections in that community, like even as we like move out from Brandeis, because like what happened to everyone from like before, like between the 80s and the 90s, or between 2004 and 2020, like we don't have any connections to those people. And I think it's really important to actually building like the rest of the story and knowing how we can support each other moving forward.
Is there a liaison with the Brandeis alumni connections? You know, I know that often the work is often placed on students to do this kind of work. So they don't have the incentive to support the work that you're trying to put forth, Irma. You know, so that should be something that you should be aware of. Often, you know, students are not incentivized to do this work. So there needs to be structures and administrative positions in place, whether it's, you know, somebody in alumni relations that's connecting to the Latino students, alumni, Latino student organizations. You know, there should be someone in admissions that's doing this kind of work. But, you know, the populations right now do not reflect, you know, at Brandeis, the Latino population does not reflect that, that those resources are not necessary. They actually reflect that, you know, those resources are important. So probably one way to be able to do this work is to push administration to do that kind of connection.
And Blanca and Irma, based just building on that very important advice, we only have a few minutes. I want to ask someone that I think that's worked on this for quite some time to say a few words as we wind up. Jose Perez, who's been very active in many ways, bringing us together, and my brother. Jose, can you say a few words about building on Blanca and Irma's great advice and feedback?
Sure, Fernando, thanks. Listen, I agree with what I've heard, and one of the things that we've been doing is as the alumni of color is working to build those types of connections, and we need to broaden our outreach. We've been having now on a monthly basis what's called diversity initiative meetings. My term as vice president of the Alumni Association is up June 30th. Napoleon, who's on here, will replace me. I will go back, but one of the things that we're pushing on is two things. One is I think the Alumni Association is building on how to be a network to other people so we can be resources and mentors and those types of things, and employment, and we need to do better at that. The other thing is, which it also, by the way, Louis Brooks, who's the president of the Alumni Association, is on, is the issue of hiring people of color. Because part of the issue about how do you respond to students and alumni needs is to have people of color do, you know, basically that can identify and cut the shortcuts. And we're working on that. There's been tremendous amount of pressure. As a matter of fact, Elsi emailed me. One of the things I'm seeking is to get more people involved, Because as the old guys from the 70s know, the only way you get stuff done is to create pressure, okay, and make change. So those things are on moving and ongoing. I encourage everybody to join the alumni. It's a Be Connect. And again, I'm not a techie, okay, but there's Be Connect, and there are a bunch of networks, media networks that are being created in order to break down some of the silos that prevent people from doing that. And I don't know if Louis or Napoleon want to add a few words, but I know they were both online. At least I thought, because I'm on my iPhone.
Great. Thank you so much, Jose. And let's just have one more comment.
Can I say a couple of words?
Please.
Just to complete the history, I'm going back to the 60s. I came to Brandeis in 65. In 67, I believe, I was taking a course with Corey Feldman. I was beginning to see a lot of Latin people in Waltham, and I was really concerned that nobody knew anything about it. And so I asked Corey Feldman if he would allow me to do a tutorial to find out who these people were and what was going on. I conducted a census of the Puerto Rican people in town. I looked at the census data of 1960, and I believe it said something like there were 38 Latin people in Waltham. I did my census, and I actually interviewed, I think about 838 households of Puerto Ricans. Of course, I don't need to go into the issues that they had to face in those days. Simultaneously, I think in 68, Howie Winant and Mark Kaufman approached me to be part of the Waltham group that they were creating. And I said, no, I wouldn't do that, but I would be glad to create a parallel organization to work not just in education and tutoring of white kids in town, but also to address the issues of poverty, inequality, and discrimination in Waltham against the Puerto Rican people. So I started the Puerto Rican group and accessed some of the few Spanish-speaking students in the Waltham group to begin to work with us on issues of education and so on and so forth in Waltham. So that was the beginning of the Puerto Rican group, which later became the Centro Latino. Well, even before that, I will say something that is quite important. In 68, of course, after the death of the assassination of Martin Luther King, there was one other Latino non-WIN student, as I was, Roberto Marquez, on campus. And Roberto Marquez and I and many, well, just a few of them, of the African-American students at the time, began putting pressure on the institution, on Brandeis, to do something about it. And so that was beginning of the transitional year program. Roberto and I became teachers on TYP, and Roberto started the Third World Organization to merge Latino people in town and the African-American students in town, the new TYP students in the college. One interesting anecdote that is really not really publicly known is that the takeover of Fort Hall actually started at the first meeting of the Third World Organization inside Fort Hall. I attended that meeting, and we hosted an emissary from San Francisco State to talk about what was going on at San Francisco State. At that meeting, I said, look, I mean, you are asking us to sign the paper to support you. I don't think that's sufficient. I don't think that helps anybody. We need to do something else. Something like what was going on at Columbia University with the takeover. I left the meeting, and within an hour I was called. I actually left the meeting to go to the Puerto Rican group office in the Boys Club in Waltham. And then I got a call from a friend saying, hey, guess what? The TYP students just took over Fort Hall, come back. So I came back to Fort Hall, and I became the secret negotiator with Abram of the so-called non-negotiable demands. So that's just to complete the history. So
Thank you.
we were involved in many different ways prior to you know.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate taking us back to the very beginning. And
Thanks,
folks,
Orlando.
we have sadly run out of time. A quick comment, Roberto, and we're going to have to close. Please.
No, I think Orlando has pretty well summarized it. The only thing that I would add, as I listen to the much younger generations of folks there, is that there was a time at Brandeis when, in an ironic kind of way, and I think Orlando and I are kind of representative of that, in an ironic kind of way, when I got to Brandeis, I was literally the only Puerto Rican on the entire campus.
The only one.
The only one, and the only Latin American from the United States.
Except for the WIN students.
Exactly. But the WIN students were foreigners in the sense that they were coming in with a foreign scholarship. So I had absolutely no constituency on campus. Okay, absolutely none, except for the Afro-American students, which was a grand total of 4 people.
That's right. That's right.
Well,
and because of that, we first began an Afro-American group, okay, which Lloyd Daniels and I put together.
Okay? And Roy DeBerry.
And Roy DeBarry, who came later. He came after we actually had it together.
That's right.
He became the president because I was graduating and Lloyd was going on to something else. What I'm trying to get at is that I'm struck by the repetitions of the younger folk, of a lot of the stuff, but also I'm struck by how more isolated than we were even they sound. Because I frankly didn't feel that isolated. I felt lonely. There's a difference.
Right.
Yes.
There's a real difference between being isolated and being lonely. I was absolutely lonely at that place, but I was not isolated.
thank you.
There's one, someone gave the story about the 2 lines for food things. And I was struck because I had the exact same experience, but a quite different ending. I didn't know that there was anything like a different religious food line. Okay, so I went to that line for no other reason than that it was shorter. I'm from New York. I don't want to be on a bigger line. So I went to the shorter.
Me either. I agree with you, Roberto. That was me in the 90s.
Yeah, I went in and I said, hey, man, I'm going to get into this line on the shorter line. So I got into the line. I'm coming through, starting to pick up my food. And the lady across the way looks at me askance, kind of peculiar, you know, but she was this is the civil rights area too. So she was kind of not sure how to handle it. And then she said, you don't belong here. Those were her exact words. You don't belong here. And I said, and that was the wrong thing to say to me at that time. Because I'm from Spanish Harlem. Okay. And I got my hackles up and I said, what the hell do you mean I don't belong here? And she said, oh, no, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. She was not talking about race. She was talking about religion.
Yeah, I went through the same.
And she said,
Me too, in the 90s.
She said, this is the kosher line. She said, you have to be religious and you have to do this, that, and the other. And we both started laughing because we were both aware that we both read that as racial.
Right. That's part of the problem.
We want to thank you. I really regret having to close it up, but we're going to be losing this connection. But Roberto and Orlando, you were the pioneers. You can see how things have progressed to this current generation. Much work needs to be done. Let me thank all of you. I wish this was a 2-3 hour, but we're hoping this is the beginning of an intergenerational dialogue with all of us and intergenerational connections with Brandeis University and supporting the current and future Latinx students. So I just want to thank you all. The chats were very important, a chance to connect. And for all those who brought us together, whether Maria or Naomi or those who organized us, certainly Elsi. Thank you so much. This is only the beginning. This is not a goodbye, but
Amen.
I'm going to thank you all, and we're going to now be signing off. But please follow up on the chat discussions and your opportunities to stay involved. It's a wonderful day. Enjoy the rest, and here's to the future Latinx students at Brandeis. Thank you very much.